It is 5:08. My name is Dr. Theodore Foster. I'm very excited to have our third conversation in Black Study. I'm going to briefly introduce the series, introduce our speakers, and let them have at it. We'll have some time for a Q&A afterwards. So this is Conversations in Black Study, which convenes 10 scholars whose collective work deepens our understanding of the interdisciplinary field of Black studies across important themes such as religion, Black feminisms, gender and sexuality, Black and Native literature, affect theory, Black politics and organizing traditions, digital humanities, and Blacks and public history. This series is really structured around an excellent talk given by Dr. Brittnay Proctor last year, in which she says, I want to suggest that Black studies rightfully holds in awe, and Black study is to enact the break. Both necessary, but one holds us and the other releases us. Black study means holding the tradition not to build new cathedrals, but for the purpose of eventually tugging at the threads until it breaks. And that was a talk titled Sunlight Through the Fog, Caribbean Thought and the Promise of Black Studies, available on the Gilboa Public History YouTube page. I want to first thank some of our sponsors, the Department of History, Geography, and Philosophy, Department of English at the University of Louisiana Lafayette, the Gilboa Charitable Trust, Provost Office, among many others. This year's theme is grounded by the epigraph I just read, distinguishing Black studies from Black study. As a break from institutionalized forms of Black or African-American diaspora studies, Black study confronts rather than resolves internal contradictions in the field. This year's focus on the power of transformative conversations takes seriously the practice of critical dialogue as a path toward Black study that is rooted in the histories and traditions of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and Grace Lee and Jimmy Boggs' 1978 text, Conversations in Maine. Traditional academic disciplines such as history, English, sociology, political science, and anthropology have all made substantial breaks with dehumanizing traditions of Western thought rooted in colonialism, and thus the work of Black study is relevant to future scholarship and research across disciplinary formations of knowledge production and teaching. And so we're really excited for this talk titled Being Undisciplined, Black Feminist Study of Gender and Sexuality. I'll first introduce Dr. Chelsea McHale Frazier, who is a Black feminist eco-critic, writing, researching, and teaching at the intersection of Black feminist theory and environmental thought across a diverse array of platforms. All of Dr. Frazier's work is geared toward creating paths toward harmonial worlds that no longer rely on the harm of Black people, the destruction of our environment, or the exploitation of femininity to keep spinning. In 2019, she founded Ask an Amazon as an educational hub where she designs educational tools, curates community gatherings, gives lectures, and provides consulting services meant to help students, professionals, and organizations with their intellectual and creative development. She also sits on the Cornell University Department of Literatures and English faculty, where she teaches students and trains emergent scholars in fields of African-American literature and culture, gender and sexuality studies, and the environmental humanities. Dr. Frazier is currently at work on her first book manuscript, which is a culmination of years-long eco-critical investigation of contemporary Black women artists, writers, and activists. In her analyses, she illuminates the cultural histories and creative contributions of Black women who've carved out rich and transformative practice of ecological ethics alternative to the environmentalisms that are readily legible in Western society. Dr. Frazier earned her PhD in the Department of African American Studies at Northwestern University. Additionally, she earned her Master's of Arts from the Department of African American Studies at Northwestern, her Master of Arts from the American Studies program at Purdue University, and her Bachelor of Arts from the Department of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Barnard College. For this scholar, we read a forthcoming essay titled Money Good, the Problem and Promise of Black Women's Prosperity in a forthcoming essay or in a forthcoming anthology on intersectionality. I'll now introduce Dr. Brittnay Proctor, who received her PhD also in African American Studies from Northwestern University, and is a Mellon postdoctoral fellow in race and media in the School of Media Studies at the New School. Her research interests include Black studies, Black popular music, gender and sexuality studies, Black feminist theory, sound studies, visual culture, and performance. Her work has been published in the Journal of Popular Music Studies, the Journal of Popular Culture, American Literature, Sounding Out, Feminist Formations, Hyped on Melancholy, African American Review, and Reviews in Digital Humanities. Her forthcoming book, Minnie Riperton's Come to My Garden, will be published with Bloomsbury Press 33 and a Third series in November of this year. She's also working on another monograph and manuscript. And so we read a co-authored piece with Dr. Proctor and Dr. James Bliss titled "It's Not as Easy as It Looks on the Page: Security, Precarity, and Working with Black Feminist Classics." So I encourage you all to read their work first and foremost, but we're really excited to have them in dialogue. They'll talk a bit about their works, but more importantly about their trajectories within Black studies and Black study, and how Black feminisms help us better understand the study of gender and sexuality. So they'll speak for about 40 minutes. We'll have about 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A at the end. So please put your questions in the Q&A once we get toward that end. I also want to thank my colleagues, Dr. Maria Seeger and Dr. Ian Beamish, for helping coordinate this excellent series. So welcome those of you on the call, and welcome Dr. Proctor and Frazier.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. Yeah, I'm excited to be in conversation with Dr. Frazier, and we drafted questions that we probably will not necessarily keep to, but as just a point of kind of organizing some of our thoughts based on the pieces that were circulated before today. And yeah, Chelsea, should I start with my first question, or do you want to start first?
Yes, I second everything that Dr. Proctor said. And also, yeah, you go ahead and start, since that's how we wrote it. We spent all this time writing this little plan, so you know.
Okay, so I might ask the question out of order because I feel like this might be a better question to open with. And so
should we do the overview first and give folks, especially folks who may not have got to the pieces yet, the overview of contextualizing, you know, the piece within the
sure.
Because I know you do a lot of different things.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, the piece that my piece that was circulated was co-authored with my colleague James Bliss, Dr. Bliss, and we were thinking about what it means to teach "quote unquote" Black feminist classics, like that of the edited anthology Homegirls by Barbara Smith, for example, and what that means to be teaching those classics in the context of, you know, the kind of current institutionalizations of gender and sexuality studies, as well as Black studies, and, you know, thinking about the increased interest in the ideas around security for undergraduates, right? So that the promise that undergraduates who are in our classrooms will be able to take what we teach them and apply it as a means to the end of having security in their lives, right? So once they get the degree, or once after they take our class, they'll be able to use it, right? This is the promise of the institution, that they'll be able to use their degree to have some semblance of security post-graduation. And we're trying to think that alongside our own precarity as, you know, junior faculty who are not on the tenure track. Luckily, I will be on the tenure track in a year and a half now. Yeah, something like that. But still, it's to think about our own precarity and how it's in relation to not even our own student security, right? Our student security is not guaranteed, right? It's a promise of the institution that is often not met on or realized. And so we're trying to think of all of these points of contention together, as well as the kind of capaciousness of Black feminists thought, theory, and thinking, and the kind of horizon of Black feminist thinking in the wake of all of these kind of modes of financialization, the neoliberalization of the institution, anti-Blackness, et cetera.
Yes. And as was pointed out we had a reading group with a few students, or we visited the working group with a few students this week. And as Theo pointed out, our work is definitely in conversation with each other. The piece that we circulated, or that I circulated for today, is called Money Good, the Problem and Promise of Black Women's Prosperity. And with that piece, I wanted to think about the ways that Black women's economic prosperity or Black women's economic enfranchisement gets gets framed by economists and in sort of popular discourse. And the ways that those framings, both theoretical and, lay framings of Black women's progress or lack thereof, really obscures our ability to understand, to mitigate the wealth gap between Black women and other populations. But I also, and so it was a bit of a critique of kind of just like of economy. Economic understandings of Black women's position in the society. And it was also an opportunity for me to really play around with and really confront what disciplinarity obscures in our conceptions of Black women's poverty and Black women's wealth. And finally, it provided an opportunity for me to think about the kind of ideals that economists as practitioners, but again, also in popular discourse, like the kind of ideals that we aspire to as a culture, that the kind of ideals that measure Black women's work and Black women's labor and the value of that labor, and whether or not they're actually, it actually makes sense for us to be imposing those kinds of ideals onto Black women or onto ourselves as a culture, because if we, most of the time, those standards are coming from a white upper middle class or white, sort of rich standard. And so what I wanted to think about was, okay, well, if we all lived and interacted with money and material resources the same way that that this class does, then our earth will be racing even more aggressively towards its demise. And so those are some of the questions and preoccupations that really animated that piece. And in terms of my larger body of work definitely leans toward more the theoretical and leans more toward the speculative. And this piece does too, but it was an attempt to ground a lot of those speculations and those theories in just some facts and figures. And so that is really, and also to really think about what Black feminist theory really makes possible, the kinds of viewpoints that, again, just don't have a place when we're thinking about other ways of framing problems and framing questions. For example, there are a lot of economists that do consider themselves Black feminists or who work from what they consider to be Black feminist frames. There's a lot of different Black feminisms. There's a lot of different theories and points of view that call themselves Black feminist. And while I'm not necessarily interested in hierarchizing them, I am interested in thinking about what different kinds make possible. There are some theories that people call Black feminism that are more so about thinking about intersections of race and class, but that doesn't necessarily always align with other forms or other investments that other Black feminisms make possible. And so if Black feminist theory or frameworks is limited to these sort of unquestioned categories of race and gender, it really doesn't help us to get to the root of some of the problems that I'm interested in, chief among them the unequal distribution of material resources across the globe. And so yeah, that's a little bit about this piece and sort of how it fits in the overall scheme of what I'm up to and trying to convince people of every day. So yeah. Yes, and we have questions for each other about these pieces and just about our work and existences as Black feminist thinkers and writers in general. So yeah. So I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague.
Well, I don't know if I should ask my question first, or if you should ask your question for me as a point of departure, or.
Wait, you know what? I think you should ask your question first, because I feel like it will continue, like,
Okay. Yeah. So, I'll go out of order, but the question I had regarding your work and the ways that you're thinking through Black feminism as a method and praxis is how Black feminism has allowed you to work through, think through, write through the kind of intramural fissures that occur in discourses on Blackness and gender and sexuality. Or to put it a different way, what conversations are you trying to cultivate exclusively amongst Black folk regarding gender and sexuality? And what tensions have emerged in trying to cultivate this work?
Yes, I love that question so much, because I think the luxury of being trained in a department where there's primarily Black scholars, and there's kind of being trained in an African American Studies department means that there were certain things that were understood, even if they were approached in 5 dozen different ways, right? So, so that being said, I didn't have to do a lot of justifying why Black feminism was the, framework that I was going to be rooted in. And I didn't have to justify a writing style that was primarily speaking to other Black women and or Black feminist scholars. And so that is so it just really freed me up to really experiment with not only confronting different things within Black feminism as a field that I found interesting, but also it allowed me to really think about the ways that Black feminism could transform in engagement with other fields, right? So I'm kind of sitting right at the middle of a lot of different discourses, but primarily environmental thought, ecological thought, environmental humanities. And so I was able to really use Black feminism to see how it was going to pass through, these central tenets or preoccupations in the environmental humanities, and then come out with something completely different. And so in that way, it really opened up so much. And I was able to, excuse the sirens in the back, you can hear that. I was able to really just bring a set of concerns that was not very popular at the time in Black feminism to the fore, but in a way that continued to, that paid homage functionally to the kinds of materials and language that were already circulating in Black feminist circles. That said, once I began to peer out from my little cave as a graduate student, that's when the justifications started and the challenges started to become clearer. And starting to do things like making your work legible to search committees, making your work, I'm speaking in general, making my work legible to search committees, making my work legible to different funding streams. That's when I ran into questions like, well, why are you using Black feminism to talk about any of this? And I was super shook because I just was like, what do you mean? What else would I use given my interest in race, gender, class, sexuality, and not just those things as sort of unquestioned categories, but thinking about like the very formation of those categories and their relationship to each other. It's just like I didn't understand why people would even ask me why I'm like, is there another theory that can do that? I don't, where's it at? Then I'll be over there talking to them. And so I think that the challenge, the intramural challenges, have been around gender specifically. And what I have, and it's something that I continue to really just, wrestle with, because my interest is not in closing down Black feminism and making it for certain groups of people. primarily thinking about it in sort of like the long history of Black feminist intellectual archive, it is primarily centered like the Black heteronormative or homonormative woman, right? And so that is something that, but that is not the only demographic for whom Black feminism is relevant to or interested in as a subject, again, thinking about Black feminisms. And so one of the biggest intramural challenges has been developing language that would allow me to talk about all of the, talk about and consider and work with a range of different kinds of people, subject positions, and interests that really Black feminism speaks to and you know, kind of finds in its brood, if you will. So those are some of the things in terms of, you know, my challenges. I think one challenge is just being super insulated. I don't know if it's a challenge or it's a great thing. I love that I was so insulated for so long, because that's why I went to a Black studies department, so that I could not have to encounter the question of why are you starting there, you know? That would have been really detrimental to me as a young scholar, and would have made what I do now a lot harder, if not impossible. And so that is something that I cherish, even as I have also managed a lot of different fissures within Black feminism, mostly around gender and also around class, that you know, continues to animate the work and keep us moving forward. So yeah, so thank you so much for that question, Brittnay. I'm sorry, Dr. Proctor, we're in front of people. Okay, so all that being said, I want to turn to your piece a little bit and think about the clarifications of and your push for the continued undisciplinarity of Black studies, especially in the face of increasing institutional pressure. I know that when you published your piece with James Bliss, you were in a particular place, you know, institutionally, right? And there have been shifts. So I'm wondering, how has your approach, and you're teaching in a different kind of department, so I'm wondering like how your approach to pedagogy has changed, if at all, since the publication of that piece, and just like, did that piece and, you know, the reception to it or the conversations around it, like what came of that? How has that been? Like, where are you now versus where you were during the writing process? I'm so curious.
Thank you. So maybe I'll just read like a couple lines from the end of the piece to kind of orient myself around the response, and then talk a little bit more about where I was and like where I'm at now and how I see the work animating, like, I guess, the future. I don't like that word, but I guess I'll use it for now. So this is on page 26 of the piece. We write, quote, "Reading and teaching these quote unquote feminist classics now means learning to inhabit the contradictory and impossible temporalities of a radicalism rooted in Black feminism. It also means reckoning with a great diversity of Black feminist voices. There are voices in the text that are liberal in ways that don't mesh with our contemporary political vocabularies and sensibilities. There are also voices that challenge us to forge political imaginaries beyond the reduction of Black radicalism to multiracial democracy. There are voices in these texts that find possibility and contradiction, that make friends with antagonism." So I think for me, you know, in writing the piece, I think both me and Dr. Bliss were feeling, you know, anxiety, like a Black feminist affect of anxiety, to kind of flip, to flip other language. Jennifer Nash's book in particular, Black Feminism Reimagined, right? So that she writes about the Black feminist affect of defensiveness. And I think the Black, if we can call it as such, a Black feminist affect of anxiety. And I think also for me, anger animated that piece. And so on one end, I at least can only speak for myself because James Bliss isn't here. Or he might be here, but if not, yeah. But I just was really on one end trying to contend with the capacious, for me and my co-conspirator, the capaciousness of Black feminist thought and theory, alongside this emerging move towards the homogenizing and the kind of hegemonic force of Black feminism's institutionalization, which is also related to the kind of hegemonic force and like pull towards institutionalizing Black studies. And in particular, the kind of radical orientations of Black studies. And so I was trying to hold that in tandem with my own just sheer anger and agitation around my own situation post-grad school. Like, I was thankful I could feed myself post defending, but I had to move to Western Ohio within less than a month of defending, and had to submit a dissertation I wasn't happy about, and to be stuck in the middle of nowhere and feel that folk were great to me. There are a lot of folk that helped me really get through that process, but just to feel deeply antagonized by my students, to feel just like overworked, underpaid, to feel like I'm called to be a foot soldier for the kind of privations of a women's gender and sexuality studies program. And in particular, to think about, or to just be just so mad at the fact that I was being called to kind of situate Black feminist thought and theory, and, you know, which is not my bag, like to situate Blackness as that object of inquiry of which Black, this, not just this program, but that the field of feminist theory, gender studies, women's gender and sexuality studies, and its many proliferations, iterations, its preoccupation with capturing, and capture is the word that I think about also, the capturing Blackness as an object of inquiry, and as such kind of, you know, defanging certain iterations of Black feminism as a radical project that's trying to fundamentally, you know, it's its own project, right? It's not, you know, it's interested in trying to show the ways that feminist theory and feminist thought, and that some of the projects that come out of this orientation, how they're just not, they are tenable for a particular social order, that being the social order that we're living in, that's fundamentally rooted in anti-Blackness. So I was just feeling all of this so, I was just feeling it so viscerally. And also the 3 years up until now, 3.5 years up until just this point where I finally feel like I can feel settled. I don't even know if settled is the right word, but it was just like, so that's my anger pretty much. And I'm not like afraid to say that yet. Like my anger, my agitation and anxiety, like how are folk going to receive this work is like, you know, I don't think we're always honest about like, you know, where folk are at and they're in doing this work, and not everyone's down to feel like I could rage against the machine and be like annoying and like talk shit with my colleague James Bliss, because I knew that a lot of our feelings around our precarity and our, you know, our orientations towards Black feminism, like it was a mutuality that I knew that he wouldn't try to come for me, or he wouldn't try to be like, yo, what the fuck? Like, I'm not trying to hear that right now. Like, let's think about the work, blah, blah, blah. So that was all really like, so this is just me feeling like I could be raw for a second. Maybe not even in my rawest form, because still we are conscripted to be police and to police ourselves because we're afraid of like, how are other Black feminist thinkers or theorists going to receive this work? Or how are other folk going to receive this work? And am I going to get a job after I fucking publish this? Which I was in I won't say, but I know this has impacted my trajectory as a scholar that has a future post dissertation defense. And I know it impacted, you know, me like quite materially. And I know it's impacted James Bliss. I'm not here to say that that's definitive. Those are feelings. Feelings are, you know, not always facts, but that's how I feel. And so coming to this work now that I'm like on fellowship for this year and next year, and that I'm not teaching, and that I get a time to just breathe and think about, writing, but also think about my pedagogy moving forward. I'm really more so, interested in creating, oddly enough, even though it's somewhat connected to this question of like security for students. But now that I am in the School of Media Studies at the New School, there is a lot of students are practitioners for foremost versus like being theorists primarily. And so I've been forced to really think about my pedagogy has always been interested in what students can make, like a zine, like a website, like a documentary film. Like I've done all those things with my students, but I'm trying to think more capaciously about like a philosophy of creation that's rooted in the kind of Black feminism and Black feminist epistemes that animate my work and my teaching. And I'm just trying to think about how this kind of philosophy of creation, and that, destruction is part of creation also. You can't create without destroying things. Not to be like, I'm not a creationist also, but but I do think there's but I also am just interested in how my pedagogy and how my research in the wake of this piece can continue to move me towards giving other Black folk in particular some kind of latitude to do the work that they need to do and that they want to do. And the work that is like sometimes really fucking, excuse my language, I probably won't be invited back, but like to do work that feels like you will be disciplined and punished for it. And it's like, it's not easy, but it's like worth it. Like I wouldn't take back doing this work. I'll never take back any work that I've done or tried to do because it's like, this is meant to be hard, and it's not meant to be like, for me at least, it's not meant to be like, I'm very much so interested in the capaciousness of, I'll say this, I'm very much so interested in the capaciousness of Black feminism as an ongoing project because of, the nodes of contention that we all need to really deal with and contend with and work through and write through and teach through. Like there is no straight way forward. And like, as a junior person, sometimes I feel deathly afraid of, like I respect the fuck out of every Black feminist scholar that's ever existed because they try to do work that is impossible and that comes with a consequence, no matter its orientation, whether it's like more liberal facing or, to do this work is like really hard. And so like, it's never disrespect, or that's not the place of which my work is animated. But also I'm very afraid that, because of this move towards like a hegemonic closing down of Black feminism as a project in the academy, that junior folk are being punished and like, and I'm not only speaking from, these are my thoughts and feelings. I need to keep saying that because I know how folk like to go on Twitter and subtweet. Like, if you want to, like, we can talk. You can email me. You can Google me. I'm sure I'm on the internet somewhere. Like, I don't feel like it should be this contentious to do this work. It should not be people like, it should not feel so frightening to do this work. It should not feel so contentious. It should not feel like you trying to walk me like a dog because I actually engage the work and I have something to say about it that maybe you don't necessarily like. And also for me, like, it's just, for me, and thinking about my turn from this piece, I'm really trying to disentangle like my own like kind of affective defensiveness around my work, like, because we're socialized to take the work so seriously. But I feel as if though we took the work seriously, you wouldn't feel so personally attacked when folk are actually reading the work and engaging it, no matter what conclusion they come to, no matter what they have to say about the work, like the work is still going to be there anyway. So like it's like heartbreaking to think about the ways that we have to come up as junior scholars in Black feminism and feel this kind of dread. That's the affect also I was feeling in writing this piece, a sense of dread, because, this idea that like, well, what are you talking about? Like, no, that's not the case. You just don't surround yourself by the right Black feminist thinkers and little, and it's like, for real, y'all, let's keep it real. Let's keep it real, because there's a lot at stake in our thinking, whether we want to believe it or not. And it's not even infighting. Like, also for me, I'll say this is the last thing I'll say, because I feel like I'm going on a tangent. But for me, my ethics is always to love tap above and never below. I don't come for graduate students. I don't come for junior faculty. That is not my tea. That's not how I get down, because I know what time it is. The minute I take what I write very seriously, and I know that the things that I write can really harm Black feminist thinkers. And I'm not just talking about Black women either, which is what we have to talk about as well, because there is this lapse between Black feminism and the category of Black woman, which I'm not really like jiving with in my own thinking. And that's something that we have to really talk about openly. We have to do that. But we have to think about the consequences of our work. And also, I also think about, like, this is what I'll say. Junior faculty or senior faculty folk that have tenure are going to be okay. They're going to be okay if we engage their work. They're going to be okay if we maybe say something that they're not jiving with or don't like. They're going to be okay. They have the institutional support and backing that they're going to be okay. You know what I mean? And we have to be able to have these difficult conversations about the work. It's not personal. Like, we don't even know each other like that for it to be like people beefing over writing. Like, please hit me up. Let's talk about the work, because talk about the work. We need to talk through our work and treat our work as a point of opening as opposed to a point of closure. That's what it is for me. So yeah, I went all over the place, but I'm not going to say nothing else for the rest of the time.
No, that was beautiful. That was very Black studies. You really performed the kind of internal contradictions that we are all wrestling through, but rarely have the space to talk about. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Frazier. Thank you, Dr. Proctor, very much.
Yeah, I mean, like, to your point, I think that there are not enough spaces for Black women and, well, Black people in general, but certainly Black women and absolutely Black feminists to kind of air a lot, to air the places where their feelings and their scholarship meet, particularly their anxieties. And so I appreciate your candor, and I'm somebody who definitely, like, when I was reading your piece, I was like, oh yeah, here are the parts that are still a little tender from this process, and it really gave me an opportunity to reflect on that and think about the ways that, again, our scholarship is kind of birthed from a lot of those anxieties, whether we voice them or not. And so I really commend the risks, you know what I'm saying, like that come with really just telling your experience as you're experiencing it. The Academy can be very, very unforgiving to Black women when they do that. And so, it's just one of those things that we all navigate in very different ways, but does exist. It doesn't exist all the time, but it exists a lot of the time. It exists enough of the time where the denial of its existence feels violent when it does happen. And I have found that there are people who are in senior positions to me, and this is certainly not all, who, when I've been like, oh, I'm feeling a certain kind of way, or I'm feeling discouraged, about any number of things that are going on, I've certainly been met with like, what? Like actual a lack of awareness about it. And so when I, just in my own experiences, when I sort of saw that, I was like, oh, some people just really don't understand. Some people, I'm sure will understand and like are willfully ignoring, but I have definitely found a lot of people just are not aware of what's going on because of the way that power is distributed, not only within the academy, but also various industries that are, you know, interconnected with ours. So I just wanted to say that as well. Yeah, okay. So another thing I was thinking about was, oh, do you, so I think a lot about how we can move things forward, you know, or change things, right? And something that you mentioned, Dr. Foster, in your introduction, Black Studies is kind of orientation toward, I think you said confrontation rather than resolution. Is that right? Yes.
That Black study is trying to wrestle with the internal contradictions, and there is a demand to resolve them, to make things simple. And I think that belies a lot of the discussion that you all are expressing right now, analyzing right now. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've been thinking a lot about that actually lately, because I'm someone who is selectively confrontational. Yeah, like I don't go looking for fights, but I'm always ready, you know? And so but part of the reason why is always to your point, Brittnay, about destruction being often the prerequisite for creation. Like, what can we create, you know? And one of the ways in which, and it's less so now, but when I began my platform, Asking Amazon, I received an array of responses. Most of it was overwhelming support, but there were other folks that were like, what are you doing? You know, why would you do this? This isn't what we do. And we meaning kind of like this loose amalgam of like Black academics or just academics in general. But part of the reason why I did, and part of the reason why I'm interested in continuing to, you know, partner with other people in other industries out loud, is because I am, you know, like water, you know, if I run into a boulder, I'm going to go around it, you know? And one of those boulders is the academy in general, and its structures and the way that it polices, you know, Black women's behavior, Black women's clothes, Black women's hair, Black women's money, Black women's words, Black women's food, Black women's everything. You know what I'm saying? If there is no, if there, and or rather it retains the potential to do so, you know? And so what I wanted to do was think about different ways that this work could live outside of the academy and also sustain me and my family. And also to do so in ways that I would be able to provide a model for my students to do the same thing, you know, or to do something else, to do anything else. Like, hey, this is one way in which this body of work equipped me to build success in these other ways. Because even though I'm capable of equipping my students to build success within, you know, the academy, it's not going to be for everybody. And everyone who's interested in the intersection, anyone who might become my student or mentee, is not going to be interested necessarily in an academic career, but still might be interested in that training. So some of the ways in which I've approached that precarity is to find ways to build something else, you know, which of course comes with its own set of challenges, right? But it's also, you know, I'm definitely someone who's like, all right, well, we know where this road's going. Like, let's see where some of these other ones go too, you know? Yes. So I'm also looking at the time, and I definitely want to open up to make it, you know, a conversation for, I see there's like some folks in the room and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a good time to transition to Q&A a bit. I know I have, I guess, one reflective question, given the kind of affirmation of negative affect. I know Dr. Palmer and Infante really, their scholarship and their conversation really centered that necessary dialogue. And so this question of destruction and creation, I know, is one that organizers, activists, artists are having while they wrestle with questions of abolition, anarchism, reform. What does it mean to respond to this current moment, and the ways in which you all have very effectively and candidly addressed. I think that's necessary. So when I think about transformative conversation, I think about the real urgency of this moment, right? And every moment. And so, I know one huge gap in my undergrad education and master's education, Ohio State and University of Alabama at Birmingham, was a serious engagement with Black feminisms. And I definitely took that more seriously in graduate school and was fortunate to be around colleagues who were interested in doing the reading and discussion work. And so I know yourselves and Dr. Shaniqua Roach provided a platform for Black feminist scholars at a number of levels and graduate students to engage in this excellent conference that I was just a kind of worker bee in helping to support in Black feminist futures, right? And so I guess that was some 6 years ago now, 5 years ago now. It was a while ago, but I thought it was a really important moment for myself and so many others to think about these internal contradictions and wrestle with them. And so I'm curious if Black study is to enact the break, but is necessarily tied to that kind of tradition that birthed us, Black studies, right? How are you thinking about that tension today, right? What kind of futures within the academy and outside does Black feminisms offer the world? I know, to your point, Black feminisms as a theoretical framework, as an analytical framework, has great purchase across embodied positions, industries, institutions to really wrestle with them, right? And so looking back 6 years later, how do you see that tension between the kind of institutionalized forms of Black feminism and the kinds of ways in which Black study might gesture to a Black feminism that tries to break with that institutionalization?
I love this question. I'm gonna jump in, Brittnay, okay. So I feel a lot of ways about my investment in Black feminism post that event. That event was one of the highlights of my time at my previous institution, because it revealed so much about how I wanted to move as a Black feminist scholar in the academy. It revealed so much about the kind of departments that I wanted to be in. It revealed so much about the kind of colleagues that I wanted to continue to build with, and the ways that I wanted to carry out projects, moving forward. It also helped me to really, really be clear about the kind of advice that I give to my students now about institutional work at the graduate student level. It was something, it was one of those things where I bit off way more than than I thought I was when I started the project, but I guess that's anything worth doing, and so and I think seeing what I was capable of and seeing what a team who was interested in bringing that to a fore was capable of was really encouraging for me at a time when, even though I felt very institutionally supported, I felt disenfranchised because of the position of being a graduate student, or disenfranchised, the wrong word, disempowered as a graduate student in general. I felt like, well, maybe at some point when I get a degree and get a job, people might care about my work or me, But at the time, I knew that my personal world cared about me, but I didn't necessarily presume that anyone outside of that immediate, kind of circle did. And so it was an opportunity to really show, to take something on that I was not ready for and got ready for in the midst of it. And just some background for folks that aren't familiar. We put this event together, myself, Dr. Proctor, another colleague of ours, Dr. Shaniqua Roach, came together, and we were interested in thinking about Black feminist precarity, basically, in the academy, and how we could bring together a number of scholars to talk about that. I want to say it was 16 scholars, 16 or 17, something like that, maybe. And we raised—
It was a lot. It was a lot.
It was a lot. It was a lot for us to not have kind of like an institutionalized, formation really on campus. It was just the three of us coming together. We're like, well, I guess we got to raise this money and do this, And we raised close to $40,000 in order to, in less than a year. And when we approached various entities in order to try to do this, we were met with a lot of, "You'll never do that. There's no way you can do that. you won't get the money, you won't get, I mean, we were just met with like it's not going to happen. We were met with more, yes, you can, and here's how you do it, which is why it happened. But we were certainly met with the opposition as well. All that being said, I think that I'm a little bit ambivalent. I'm a little bit ambivalent to the idea of kind of remaining in a state of contradiction, and that producing like endless dread. I think that that's a place where many, not even necessarily Black. I think that this is I'm gonna stand out on a limb and say like there's a distinction between Black study and Black study scholars, and then Black feminist study and Black feminist scholars. I find myself floating between the two poles a lot. But I think that to your point about Black studies being about a confrontation rather than a resolution, that's very real. And that makes room for a lot. It also forecloses a lot though, right? Like we can kind of, I think that we can romanticize the work that, it's very easy to romanticize the work that Black study can do. And to put it frank, to just intellectualize a lot of unresolved hurt and pain, like within us as individuals, but also collectively, right? And it becomes a lot harder to do that when someone crystallizes that hurt and that pain into a theory, or crystallizes it into a political framework, right? Because once it becomes that, then now we're dealing with dogma, you know. Now we're dealing with different people feeling this way and other people feeling that way, you know. Now you got like really high articulated set tripping, you know, and it's just like it can become very overwhelming for me as someone who is, I wouldn't say that I'm like a neat resolution oriented person, but I am interested in living my life and developing scholarship that puts me at ease, and that also works towards some type of ease or peace for the Black feminist subjects of multiple genders, races, and societal positions. Like that's what I'm interested in. You know what I'm saying? I'm interested in kind of I'm interested in peace. I really am interested in peace. And I don't think that Black study is interested in that generally. And I think that that's okay, because there is time for, and before you can get to the piece, you got to figure out what's going on, you know. And Black studies has been the experimental arena where I can think about problems with as many tools, you know, as possible, right? But I'm not interested in staying at the level of the problem in terms of my career and in terms of my life. I refuse to conceive of myself as a problem, and I refuse for my scholarship to stay there. There are some pieces that are like, here's the problem, that's the end. If you want something moving toward something else, you gotta read the next piece, you know? And so that is part of the reason why I don't, really the only intellectual home that I feel the most accountability to is Black feminism, because of the ways that again, Black feminism can theorize and understand and talk about, you know, gender, sexuality, class, their formations, and their relationships to each other in the best way, in my estimation. I don't think there's another field that does it in the best way, you know. Nor is there another field that has that is populated with as many people that I want to talk to as Black feminism does. And so that is that's something that I think has changed. I think that when I was doing that event, I was absolutely fine I was absolutely fine with conceiving of my role in the academy as a problem and then working from there. And for even my work to kind of just be this like adjutant, is that a word? Irritant, something. And now I don't feel that way anymore. And I think that event and just other happenings in my life, and really an interest in being well and to not repeat the kinds of patterns of illness and death that plague Black feminists. I just was like, I that will not allow me to do what I came here to do. And even prior to, entering into the academy in kind of a more formal way, I was really convicted by a lot of warnings from senior Black feminist scholars who were like, don't let them kill you, to put it super frank. We just lost Bell Hooks, Barbara Christian, Audre Lorde, like all these people who did this prolific work, and they died in their 50s and their 60s. And I just like, I can't. And that was one of the ways that it started to become a running joke, I think. My question always to scholars when they would come to Northwestern was like, okay, how do you take care of yourself? What are you doing? Are you happy? Because I don't want to do what you're doing if you're not happy. And if you are happy, or if you figured out some way to be at peace with yourself in this profession, I would like to know what that is, so that I can incorporate that into my intellectual and political preoccupations. So, yeah.
No, incredibly helpful and beautiful, especially toward our understanding of what transformative conversation should be. Clearly that moment was a moment of transformation, and you have transformed since, right? And that's the point, I think, right? It's that tension, and we got to work with that tension and not avoid that tension, but try and, work towards something else. And I appreciate your last point about how, we remember those who are now ancestors. Toward that end, Dr. Doris Adelaide Derby, the SNCC veteran, longtime Black woman freedom fighter who spent 9 years in Mississippi in her youth trying to organize Black life and transform toward that end. So I wanted to uplift her, given that SNCC is certainly one of those groups of Black folk of a variety of positions who demanded to have critical conversations, right? Not to avoid that confrontation, but to really, think about another future. And so we're running low on time. So folks who want to throw a question in, please do. I saw a student ask a question that I thought I might turn over to Dr. Proctor that I think is related to the conversation we've been having and what Dr. Frazier just offered us. So Jamira Beener says, I know you talked about anxiety in Black women, but did also think other mental illnesses such as depression relates to that also in Black women, because we often are stereotyped as angry Black women or women, right? And so how does Black feminisms and your experiences in the academy, Dr. Proctor, speak to that question from Ms. Beener? Yeah, so I think me and also Chelsea don't agree with a lot of things, and I still love her. That's my boo down, like, and that's the part, like, we're meant to be like foot soldiers for this kind of adversarial dynamic because we don't agree. And the other piece I circulated was thinking about the calling for the push towards the undisciplinarity of like Black studies as it's being so trenchantly, institutionalized. So yeah, agreeance is not, I'm not with it. Like, I feel like that's evilness to me. Like, we don't all have to agree, but we could still fuck with each other and, excuse my language, love on each other and show up for each other and be there for each other and engage the work in really productive ways. So, so I think related to this question around depression and mental illness, I'm always trying to think about how anti-Blackness structurally conditions conditions how we get to do this work, or how we can do this work, how we show up to do this work. And I'm also always trying to think about the ways that there's only so much I can do to care for myself, given those parameters, that, there is all of these other ways that structurally I am not going to be well because I live in an anti-Black world where, and if I'm taking stock of it or not, I'm being antagonized every single day of my life because of things that have nothing to do with me, that I have absolutely no control over. And I know that sounds fatalistic, but I do think, what has helped my mental health and depression and anxiety is the kind of catharsis and being able to name that and contend with that and like wrestle with that and like,
I've been reading more Fanon lately, and he was a psychiatrist. He actually practiced psychoanalysis and was really trying to work with Black African patients around this, you know, this idea of like, what practices as a psychiatrist can I engage in so that Black folk can have some catharsis around this structural problem that I, as a psychiatrist, cannot fix, you know, that I cannot singularly, like, I can't prescribe them really anything other than this like moment of like rupture where they can actually confront the antagonism that animates their life, you know, in our social order in a world that is like, you know, at least I would argue rooted in anti-Blackness. And so what Black feminism has offered for me is a way to not feel like I'm being gaslit every day of my freaking life, because I'm not happy sometimes. And I'm sad sometimes. And I'm mad as hell a lot of the time. And what Black feminism has offered for me is like some peace with that being the range of emotionality that I experience in this world, you know? Like Black feminism is afforded me and given me the permission to rage, to be upset, but to still move forward and try to do work that is trying to untend a lot of these violently epistemic, these violently epistemic orientations that are trying to get us to reproduce these same ideas about, like, you know, coalition, collaboration. Like, if we're all in this together, when it's like, no, we're not all in this together. And that's not because of people's choices. That's not because you're a good person or a bad person, right? Black feminism taught me that we don't have to moralize about this predicament. It's not about you're a good person, you're a bad person. Structurally, white folk, the precondition of them being white is our death and destruction. That's just how I feel. And that doesn't make, you can't individualize your way out of that, is how I feel. And the more that we can collaborate around that idea that it's not about, you're a good white person, you're a bad white person, I'm a good Black person, you're a bad Black person. And think about like how we're all called to do awful things in the name of, you know, maintaining the shit the way that it is. We're all called to do it. And some of us willingly more than others do the work to maintain that. That's the issue for me. That's what's so hard. That's what's so like soul crushing. That's what, like, you know, and I don't feel destroyed by that. I just realize that it's hard. It's hard, but it's worth, like, as Joy James has said, like, yeah, it's hard, but it's worth our efforts. It's worth trying, you know? And like, we can take care of ourselves and look after each other in ways that are really rooted in a kind of Black radicality that doesn't treat people like they don't matter, that they're nothing, that they're just a cog in the machine. We can do that, and that's important. But also for me, a lot of what animates me in my work is to just be like, no, this is not it. And there's another way. And the way through is to just have these moments of like, yeah, I'm about to have a nervous breakdown, but is that my personal failure? Is that a moral failure for me? It's my fault. It's my fault as a Black woman living in America that I just cannot deal right now. No, that's not my fault. That's not a failure of me or of my own, right? So I think thinking about depression and mental health is like, what's really, like I said, Black feminism has given me a way to articulate all of these feelings that we deem to be negative, and to use them as like, to hold myself in that, and to show up for myself in that, and to show up for other Black feminists in that, and to say, you know what, yeah, this fucking sucks. This hurts. This hurts me. I feel like I can't do this shit no more, you know? But that's the opening for me, you know? Like, that's the opening for me to continue to do this work, is to say like, yeah, it sucks, it hurts, it's sad, but it's worthwhile to like go back to Joy James's point. It's worthwhile. It's worth our efforts, even if it hurts so bad and it doesn't make a way for us to sometimes, you know, yeah, it's just like, it's like, ask, like, how can I function in dysfunction? You know, it's like, no, I don't, no, like, I'm not choosing, I can't do that. That for me, maybe I'm like not well also, you know, I don't know what well means either in an anti-Black world that's built on subtler violence, you know, death and destruction. Like, what is wellness? What does it mean to be well? Can we be well in this? And Black feminism has taught me that, like, as long as we are holding each other dear and trying to show up for each other and love each other and love on each other, like, you know, maybe to be well means that, and not like, you know, something else. I don't know. Anyway.
No, that's very helpful. And I think a beautiful way to conclude. One holds us and one releases us, right? From having to be the problem. And I think, you know, having space to have that conversation honestly, as I feel both of you have today, really allows us to think about the critical purchase of Black feminisms across these different issues, right? And places where they show up. Dr. Frazier, do you have anything else you want to throw in there? You look like you were about to drop something, no?
Oh yeah, I got some.
Please.
So yes, so Dr. Proctor talks a lot about openings, right? Like those Black feminist openings and where they lead. For me, Black feminism has sort of brought me to like the edge of those questions of like, what does it mean to be well in a society that's structured on anti-Blackness? What does it mean to be well if the metrics for achieving what society, you know, or public discourse says is well, we know because we've done the research, is inextricably linked to the exploitation of, you know, functionally just like a doomed underclass, which depending on the moment, if you take this degree away or whatever, could be me, you know, is members of people in my family or community that I hold dear, et cetera, et cetera. However, those openings for me have really affirmed my interest in investing psychologically, emotionally, intellectually, politically, and spiritually in things that are not merely recapitulation of Western or state logics. A lot of indigenous worldviews that have predated what we have now, you know, and indigenous archetypes of femininity, of masculinity, that have nothing to do with Western conceptions of gender and sexuality. And to really, and some of my work is to really trace those things, right? Folks like Wangari Maathai, that, well, yes, her too, but also Wangechi Mutu, thinking about the ways that, again, these sort of indigenous archetypes of femininity and masculinity, relationship to earth, populate their politics, populate their work. And Wangechi Mutu's, you know, case, you know, thinking about what the West likes to call like folklore, but are really archetypes that have existed since times immemorial in order to fortify and help people, you know, particularly African people or Black people, African descended people, to mend and keep stable their psyches. That's something that Fanon, for example, didn't have access to or wasn't interested in, right? And so if we're talking about, so Fanon, like using sort of like these, you know, these Western theories of psychology in order to really like bring forth his work, meant that we could, again, he's a brilliant theorist in terms of outlining the problem, but, you know, there are other things that there was only so far that he was gonna be able to go, you know, and stayed in that kind of place of anguish, right? And so at least that's how it, I mean, I don't know what happened in his personal life, but that's how it played out on the page. And so some of what Black feminism has allowed me to do is sort of just take up a challenge of divesting from that, and not divesting in it in a way that sort of then left me empty, but then thinking about like, okay, well, what could replace those things that have taken up so much space in my psyche? what kind of archetypes have I inherited, you know, from not just my intellectual forebears, but my ancestors, more recent and primordial, right? Like what have I, because one of the things that I also like to share with some of my students is like, you know, yeah, everything is colonial, but everything is also everything else too. If things were not indigenous, if things were not being held together by something, then we wouldn't be here, you know? If there was no balance, then we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't still have the fortitude to be doing that work. We wouldn't have the fortitude to be interested in thinking about these questions and to seeking out a different way of being that is not just turmoil, you know? And so, so that is, and really, I think that not only has Black feminisms helped me to do that, but where Black feminism had a strange relationship with the world because of histories, with Earth, I'm sorry, in the West, because of histories of anti-Blackness in the West, continuing to dig into that Earth wisdom, really, that's where the balance came for me. And it was just like, there's something beyond this. There is a wisdom that is rooted in these roots, in these trees, in this Earth. There's a wisdom in the way that my ancestors engaged with this that supersedes a lot of what I am going through, but doesn't ignore what I'm going through, right? There's tools there for healing, and there's tools there for maybe a deeper or more holistic resolution. And so I think that's also part of where I do kind of wander away from Black studies and even Black feminist studies, because Black studies and Black feminist studies is rooted in a critique of the West. That is what it is, right? And helps me to do so much of that work that I'm interested in doing. But there's a limit, because the West is not the Western universalizing logics is not the whole of the world, and it never has been. And so that is where I start to wander into other places and think about archetypes, for example, to address this question from Jamira, where think about like archetypes of African archetypes of femininity, where there is room for deep pleasure, unbridled anger and destruction, and peace, right? And they're in a continuum, right? As opposed to the kinds of Western understandings of gender, or even like feminine archetypes that we understand to be tied to the West, that even have been trickled down and are now have left us with this thing where, you know, we have to be one thing or the other, good or bad, you know, mad or happy, you know, and the reality of the situation is like, pick a day, you know, pick a day and figure out what is needed for that day, and then approach that day with that, you know. Sometimes the day needs some anger, sometimes the day needs some peace, sometimes the day needs some water, sometimes the day needs some dirt, you know. It depends. It really depends. And what I'm interested in, and why I'm interested in thinking about Black feminism and ecology together, is how we can develop different metrics for applying what is necessary for that day to that day. And so we can move away from universalizing logics that say, no, if this thing happens, this is always how we respond. It doesn't work. We see that it doesn't work. It doesn't work on an individual level, and it doesn't work on a broader level as well. It has put us into this ecologically devastated moment that we're in. And so that's how I think about, you know, being an angry Black woman. I'm like, yeah, I'm angry. I'm a Black woman, you know. I'm also a happy Black woman. Sometimes I'm a sad Black woman, you know. I'm a passionate Black woman. Sometimes I'm an aloof Black woman. It depends on the moment. It depends on the day. And the more that I am invested in understandings of the world that are beyond this current one, the more peace that I have with that reality, even if I'm still conscripted into the ones that we're more familiar with. So, yeah.
Thank you for that addendum. I knew there was something boiling over there, and I wanted to have that, you know.
I just want to say really quickly, yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. And I want to clarify that I'm not advocating for Black folk to look after themselves and take care of themselves. I'm just like, you know, my point of departure is like, all right, catharsis is my way forward and through, you know, my catharsis with like, you know, because what we are meant to hold is not our shit. It's not ours to carry, you know? I mean, it's designed for us to carry, but, you know, my catharsis is just, my way through is to say, no, this is what it is, you know? This is what it is. So yeah.
Yes. Yes.
in so many ways, you all held myself and so many other grad students in those kind of critical conversations during those grad classes, after those grad classes, and other places and spaces. I do seriously all the time think about the kind of dangerous work that the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee got into in the dead of night in Mississippi, when you know the Klan's outside, right? Actively hunting your friends, and you still persist, right? And, you know, from Ella Baker to one of my mentors in Chicago, Dr. Fannie Rushing, and so many other Black women, really, you know, among Black youth, among Black men, had those debates, right? And didn't give up, despite adults saying, you know what, that's too dangerous. Y'all should just be a junior program in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference rather than your own autonomous work, right? And what's so beautiful is all those veterans of the SNCC are still active in their 70s and 80s, right? Like, they don't stop, and they evolve too. And so I think those kind of transformative conversations are necessary for us to have, for Black folks to have, for Black scholars to have, for Black public intellectuals to have, right? In whatever way we envision that. And so one of our speakers for next week, William Anderson, I know, is having a critical conversation with Miriam Kaba about this very point, that folks on the quote unquote progressive left don't agree. And we need to have the space to talk about how we don't agree without consigning someone to the dog pen, right? Or some form of subhumanity. And so that's why I really was looking forward to this conversation between you two, because I know you bring different diagnostics and different kind of forms of creative destruction, right? We need that fuel for the future. And so I hope folks who are still on the call can join us next week for a talk between William Anderson and Dr. Joshua Myers titled Black Study, Black Anti-Politics, in which we'll continue this conversation. So thank you, Dr. Frazier and Dr. Proctor, for this wonderful conversation that will be archived at the Gilboa Center for Public History website. And so it'll be a helpful and healthy conversation, Dr. Proctor and Dr. Frazier.
I didn't know it was going to be archived, but let's roll with it. Heck yes. Also, Chelsea, thank you so much for, yeah, I love you, and I always love talking with you. And even though we don't agree sometimes, I still love you, and that will never change.
Likewise. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be together again. Like, especially after putting on an event like we're just like, we ain't never gonna do nothing else again.
Listen, it was like, this is so. No, it was wonderful, and it was a good opportunity to just really do the work. Yeah, thank you, Chelsea. And thank you everyone for being here.
So much for your questions. Thank you, Theo. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you. Yes, Theo and Maria, thank you for making this possible. It's amazing.
Look forward to many, many, many more. So anywho, you all have a great weekend. We'll convene again next Friday at 5 p.m. Hope you can all join us. And I hope folks who are watching this in the future will take great fuel moving forward. Anyway, everybody take care. We'll talk later.
Bye.